Kevin Riley opened the front door, took off his shoes, and walked down the hallway to the kitchen. He had just dropped his wife, Carrie, off at the airport where she was scheduled to catch an 8 o'clock a.m. flight to the state capital. It was her 3-day trip, which she took every 2 weeks to fulfill her secretarial duties for her boss, Bradley Knox III, or, as Kevin always called him, Trey. Every time he used that nickname for his boss's official name, Carrie reminded him that her boss couldn't stand him. Although he never admitted it to his wife, it was one of the reasons he always found a way to slip the nickname into the conversation. She may have thought Bradley Knox III was a great guy, but Kevin didn't like him. There was something fake about him. He glanced at his watch and saw that it was only 7:30 in the morning, which meant he still had enough time to make it to the store by 9 when it opened. He had time for another cup of coffee, and as he poured it, he realized he would have time to check his email and maybe browse the internet for a while. He wasn't a big fan of computers and the internet, but he found that email was a good way to keep in touch with some of the people he had studied with at vocational school. There were 4 of them, and they had all studied together, learning the ins and outs of diesel engine mechanics. The other 3 had found jobs outside the city, but he had been lucky enough to find work with a large heavy equipment sales and service company right here in his hometown. At 30, Kevin was one of 3 chief mechanics and had a crew of 5 under him. Being the head of the group didn't mean he didn't have to work with the others. He still got his hands dirty just like they did, although he mainly worked on fuel systems. Kevin liked his job, even though it could mean unexpected overtime and occasional trips out of town. At least he didn't have to drive as much as Carrie. She had been working at the Crosby and Knox law firm for only 6 months, having landed the job a week after completing the advanced training required to move from a real estate clerk position to a higher-paying legal secretary position. Carrie and Kevin met in college while both were studying their craft. That was more than 8 years ago, and they have now been married for 6 years. When they got married, Kevin had just started working at the store, and Carrie got a job as a secretary at a local real estate firm. Working together, they were able to save up for a down payment on the house they now live in. The opportunity to move into their own home came less than 2 years after they started their careers, something they were both very proud of. Finishing his coffee, Kevin headed down the hall to the guest bedroom, where their computer was located. He hoped it was still on, because he noticed that Carrie had used it for a few minutes after she got dressed and ready. At least he wouldn't have to wait for it to boot up if she left it on. Entering the room, he looked at the picture they used as their screensaver, slowly moving across the screen on a random journey across the monitor. "Damn, we look good," he said to the empty house, staring at their image moving in front of him. They were lying side by side on lounge chairs, surrounded only by white sand, with the blue Persian Gulf stretching out behind them. Both were well-tanned, smiling, and wearing the skimpiest swimsuits. It was one of many photos taken during their vacation in Cancun 18 months ago. Both were wearing sunglasses, so his gray eyes and Carrie's blue eyes were not visible, but even behind them, almost nothing could be seen. Carrie's light hair was lighter than his sun-bleached light brown, and their tans were almost identical. As they lay on their lounge chairs, you couldn't tell that she was 4 inches shorter than him. He didn't want to use that photo as his wallpaper, but Carrie wouldn't let him use one of the photos taken when they spent a day at the resort's nude beach. She was afraid that her parents or someone else she didn't want to see would somehow walk into the room when the photo appeared on the screen. After listening to her concerns, he left the photos in a secure, password-protected folder. Perhaps if he had had time, he would have quickly glanced at the folder before leaving for work to admire Carrie's ample 36C breasts. But considering that he would have to spend the next 2 nights alone in their bed, he decided that might not be the best idea. Watching their photo move diagonally from the right edge to the top of the screen, he finally pressed the button to remove the screensaver. The photo and black background disappeared, and he saw that a message from Carrie had appeared on the screen, sent from her work address at Crosby and Knox. He wondered why she had left it on the screen. After all, she had told him that the corporate system had to be protected for a variety of legal reasons. She had always been paranoid and afraid that he would see her messages when she logged into her corporate account from home. After thinking for a second, he glanced at the top of the screen, where the familiar hourglass icon appeared above the log out command. He realized what had happened. Their faulty high-speed modem had broken down again. About once a week, it would stop communicating with the cable company's equipment, and the only way to get it working again was to turn the modem off. Such a hard reboot always brought it back to life. He had already reached for the modem to turn it off when a phrase from an email that Carrie had left in the morning in a hurry appeared on the screen. The word underwear caught his attention, and as he looked at it, he couldn't understand why it was in an email on her work account. At that moment, he pulled his hand away from the modem and froze as he read the email his wife had received from her boss that morning. It wasn't very long, but the words pierced him like a spear. Carrie, I hope I catch you before you leave. I really want you to bring that black bra I gave you on our last trip with the turquoise accents. You didn't get a chance to wear it for me. My first meeting with the governor isn't until 2 p.m., so we'll have plenty of time for you to put it on. I took it off for you this morning. Bradley. He reread the message 3 times, hoping it would somehow clarify its meaning beyond the obvious. However, all that was left was obvious. Carrie was having an affair with her boss, Trey. Kevin didn't realize it, but if any of the witnesses had seen him sitting at his computer, they would have described him as staring at the screen, periodically opening and closing his mouth like a goldfish in an aquarium. Finally, Kevin shook his head, staggered, and stood up, pushing his chair so hard that it bounced off the wall as he left the room. He knew what black bra Trey was talking about. He had seen it in Carrie's underwear drawer when she was getting ready, and it was still there when she closed her suitcase and zipped it up. He prayed that it was still there, because that could mean that the letter was a joke, some kind of sick joke. His hand trembled as he opened the drawer, and it became clear that the black bra with blue and green bows on the clasp was no longer there. He quickly checked all her drawers, hoping she had just moved them, but they weren't there. Realizing that his wife had returned to the room and taken the missing lingerie, Kevin sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to remember what Carrie had said about them when she brought them home. Kevin had seen them when she was unpacking and had taken them from her hands, saying, "For me? You mean for me to wear for you?" He remembered smiling stupidly. Carrie smiled as she took them from his hands and said, "Not tonight. I got them on sale for half price at Victoria's Secret, but they're still expensive." He remembered how she put them in her desk drawer, and they didn't cross his mind until morning. That night, they made love like they always did when Carrie came back from her 2-week trips. She didn't need lingerie. Just being close to him was always enough for her. Kevin sat for a few minutes thinking about the letter and the underwear. Finally, he decided that it couldn't mean what it seemed to mean. There had been no signs or signals that he thought there should be if a wife was cheating on her husband. She was as loving as ever and wanted to be with him very much. He couldn't remember the last time they had had a serious disagreement, let alone an argument. And their sex life was more intense than it had been during their vacation in Mexico. He must have missed something that could explain the message. He returned to his computer and began pressing the stop button in his browser, jumping from screen to screen to return the cursor to its normal position. With any luck, the logout command wouldn't work, and he'd be able to peek into her inbox and see if there was anything else from that bastard. Crossing his fingers, he restarted the modem and waited for the green lights to come back on. When they did, he carefully examined her email and the folders displayed on the web page behind it. Scrolling down to the message about underwear, he looked closely and saw that the only open folder was Inbox. He clicked on it and found 4 more messages. Opening them one by one, he found that they were all about legal matters that meant nothing to him. He began to fear that he would have nothing else he could use to find out what was going on between Carrie and her boss, if anything was going on at all. As he began to scan the folder names, he got lucky. Between the folders named after 2 local companies was another one labeled Personal. He clicked on it without thinking, hoping it was the folder he was looking for. The folder was full of message headers, and he saw that about half of them were from her boss. The folder was sorted by date, and he cautiously opened the first message, afraid of what he might find there. The first message was very long, and as he read it, the color drained from his face and all emotion disappeared. He read it a second time, clenching his teeth. When he finished reading it for the second time, he reached out, turned on the printer, and printed out the entire letter. While the letter was printing, he glanced at the clock and saw that he would be late for work if he didn't leave immediately. He couldn't concentrate on his work, so he took his cell phone and called work to say he was sick, which wasn't far from the truth. The printer had finished printing, so he closed the letter he had read and moved on to the next one. For the next hour, he worked mechanically, selecting and reading letters, printing most of them, and then forwarding copies to his personal email address. When he was done with the letters, his eyes filled with tears, and he realized that his marriage was over. After checking Carrie's email at Crosby and Knox one last time and finding nothing important, he deleted it from the company website and went to his personal email account. He created a separate folder and moved all the forwarded messages to it. The last thing he did was change his password, as he couldn't remember if Carrie knew his old one. He wanted to keep these emails in case he needed to print out more copies. Turning off the computer, he took the printed messages and his cold cup of coffee and returned to the kitchen. He took a beer from the refrigerator, sat down at the kitchen table, and reread the messages. He was surprised at how much they told him, especially compared to what he remembered about the last 6 months and Carrie and Trey's trips to the state capitol. Carrie had been at her new job for only a week when she was told she would have to accompany her boss to the state capitol to take statements, find and print anything he might need from the corporate files, and generally provide whatever assistance was necessary. Their firm lobbied local business people and entrepreneurs on behalf of the governor and represented other clients in state courts. When she first told him about it, it all seemed so noble. Now he realized that Trey was probably hitting on his wife and that some of the trips didn't require her presence for business purposes. He also noticed that Carrie soon began to volunteer to help arrange meetings with Trey. After restoring the emails, Kevin realized that Trey had probably seduced his wife during the second trip, although it could have happened during the first one. The first email in her personal folder was Trey's response to her email, thanking him for the beautiful Gucci bag he had given her and for the wonderful dinner they had enjoyed together. She also mentioned how much she enjoyed everything else, although the letter did not specify what she meant. However, his reply mentioned their night together, so Kevin knew exactly what she meant. That first message had also explained where she got the handbag she had suddenly appeared with a few months earlier. When he asked how she had been able to afford it, she laughed and said it was a 40 knockoff she had bought at a kiosk in a shopping mall. The realization that her deception had begun so long ago and how easily she had lied made him feel sick. This was not the Carrie he remembered and loved. The correspondence continued regularly, usually before or immediately after a trip. He assumed that they communicated in person between trips, without resorting to email, or that the messages she saved were more important to her. It was impossible to know, and to be honest, it didn't really matter. By the third or fourth email, he learned how they had been hiding their meetings from him and from the company's management. They always stayed at the same hotel and booked 2 identical rooms. Kevin didn't notice this, but every evening when he called her around 10 p.m. at room 612 of the Hyatt Inn, she was waiting for his call. After he called, she would join Trey in his room for the night. He seemed so predictable that they could play with him like a fish. Their jokes about how he regretted not calling a little earlier so they could meet sooner cut him like a razor. He had never seen this side of Carrie before, although it fit perfectly with his image of his boss. Another letter explained where Carrie had gotten the expensive diamond earrings she wore to the Crosby and Knox Christmas party. She had told him they were zirconia, but the letter implied they were real diamonds, a very expensive Christmas gift from her lover. There was another letter from Trey in the folder thanking her for the luxurious gift. Kevin thought she was overdoing it with the thanks, but he was curious how she had thanked him personally. He couldn't believe they only saw each other once every 2 weeks for 2 nights at the Hyatt Inn. He was sure they must see each other from time to time at other times. And finally, after rereading one of the last letters, he found a clue when Trey mentioned working at a condominium. Thinking about it, Kevin remembered that Carrie had once told him that her boss lived on the 9th floor of a condo with a view of the park by the river. Now it seemed likely that they had been meeting during the day at his condo, either under the pretext of work or perhaps during lunch. If she had indeed been having fun with Trey during the week while she was in town, as he was now certain she had been very careful to cover her tracks before returning home. Of course, it could have been a coincidence, him playing the part of the blind and trusting husband. It was almost noon when he finished rereading all the letters and set them aside. He knew he had to decide what to do before Carrie returned to town with Trey. She usually flew in early Friday morning and took a taxi home from the airport. She usually called him at work to let him know she had arrived home safely. Ironically, the greatest danger always seemed to find her when she was out of town. Kevin slowly got up from the kitchen table, took 2 more bottles of beer from the refrigerator, and headed to the living room where he stretched out on the couch with the first bottle in his hand. He noticed that it was already noon and wondered where the time had gone. It seemed like almost 5 hours had passed since he had entered the house after dropping his wife off so she could pick up her lover from the airport. He realized that they must have planned everything carefully because he rarely saw Trey when he took Carrie to the airport. A couple of times he had noticed him in the departure lounge, but he had always ignored them completely. By 6 o'clock in the evening, Kevin could barely stand up. He had gone to the bathroom several times during the day, then to the kitchen, each time bringing 2 bottles of beer to the living room. However, his last attempt was unsuccessful. There was no more beer in the refrigerator. Pausing for a moment, he looked at the row of empty bottles on the kitchen table and realized that there were 12 of them, all that was left of the 2 packs he had bought the day before. They should have lasted at least a couple of weeks, and under normal circumstances they would have. But now, having drunk all 12 and eaten nothing, he desperately needed sleep. He made it to his bed before passing out, fully clothed on top of the blanket. It was 10:15 when the phone rang, pulling Kevin out of the state his thoughts had plunged him into when he lost consciousness. Images of Carrie and himself doing what they had enjoyed since they met 8 years ago flashed before his eyes. As he struggled to his feet, a glance at the clock told him that it was probably Carrie calling to find out why he hadn't called her at the Hyatt Inn. Everything he had learned came crashing down on him with renewed force, and he decided to wait until she got home to talk to her face to face. The answering machine had just started to respond when he picked up the phone and said, "Hello, is that you, Carrie?" "Yes, it's me. Why didn't you call? You always call at this time. Did something happen?" He could hear the concern in her voice and wondered why. In anger, he almost said he was sorry he hadn't let her get to Trey's bed on time, but he held back and replied, "I'm sorry, Carrie. I fell asleep." He hoped the tone of his voice didn't betray his true feelings, but then he wondered why he should even bother. "You've never done that before. What happened?" Her voice betrayed her displeasure, and he almost replied that he knew, but decided again to refrain. Instead, he replied as politely as he could, "I had a couple of beers after work, and I guess they knocked me out." He decided to go on the offensive and asked, "How was your day? Busy this morning? Hope Trey isn't too hard on you." Carrie hesitated before answering, "No, not really. Why do you ask? You hardly ever ask about my work." Just to keep the conversation going. "Everything's fine here, as expected. How are you? Everything okay?" He decided to ask her another question to gauge her reaction. She replied quickly, "What do you mean? Of course I'm doing fine. Why are you asking me that?" He noticed the anxiety in her voice again. He replied slowly, "I'm just kidding. I know you would never behave any better than you usually do. I trust you completely and know that my trust in you is well placed." She looked a little embarrassed and replied, "Of course you trust me. I just wonder why you said that. You've never said anything like that before." "Forget about it. I didn't mean anything by it." He waited a few seconds before continuing. "I think I'm going to go to bed. Beer seems to make me sleepy." "Okay, Kevin, I'll let you go. Sleep well, I love you." Kevin couldn't repeat her last 2 words, so he said, "Okay, I will. Bye, Carrie." He hung up and went to the bathroom where he got rid of the last of his beer. After a few hours of sleep, he felt a little better, although he had no intention of getting behind the wheel. He returned to the kitchen, sat down next to the phone, and waited stoically for 15 minutes to pass. When the time was up, he dialed the number of the Hyatt Hotel, which he remembered from having called there several times before, and asked for rooms 612. He wasn't surprised when the phone rang a dozen times before finally being disconnected, and he hung up. He wondered if they were playing a joke on him, coming up with a new plan to make him call her more often in the future, and also wondered if his inability to call Carrie would affect their date tonight. In the end, he decided he didn't care, but then realized that while he was sitting there thinking about it, she was probably having a good time. That realization brought tears to his eyes again, and he stumbled back to bed. The next morning, he was surprised that he didn't feel guilty about having had too much fun the night before. After a shower, he felt well enough to go to work, although his thoughts were occupied with Carrie rather than fuel filters, injectors, and precision fuel pumps. He performed his tasks mechanically, and more than one employee looked at him questioningly when he didn't seem to understand what they were saying. He was very glad when the day was over. All his thoughts about Carrie and her cheating on him with his boss were getting him nowhere. On his way home, he bought a couple of hamburgers and fries, not what he usually ate. But he had no appetite, so it didn't matter what he ate. He washed them down with 2 of the 6 bottles of beer he had bought on the way home. He knew he couldn't drink a dozen beers every night, so he had deliberately put aside the second 6-pack he had started collecting at the checkout. At 8 o'clock, he called room 612 at the Hyatt Inn, but after 10 rings, no one answered. An email informed him that Carrie had only been in the room from 9:30 to 10, the usual time for his late calls. As an experiment, he called the room every half hour, the 4th time at 9:25. None of the calls were answered, and after 10 calls, He hung up each time. The last time he called at 9:45, Carrie answered on the second ring. "Hi, Kevin. Looks like you didn't get much sleep last night. You called just in time. I was just about to get under the covers for a good night's sleep, but I thought I'd wait for your call." She laughed. "I haven't slept all night, Carrie. I was just watching TV and waiting to call you. How about you? How was your evening?" He hoped she wasn't alarmed by his question. He knew he had asked her that many times before, so he didn't think she would be surprised by his interest. "I did the same thing you did, Kevin. Just lay around and watch TV. Actually, I just turned it off. Before that, I took a long hot bath." She was very talkative, and Kevin thought she didn't suspect anything. "That's good, Carrie. You need to get some rest before tomorrow night. We'll have to think of something to keep you busy when you get back." She laughed and said, "So you're already making plans, huh? I can't wait." They talked for another 5 minutes, saying nothing important. Kevin realized she was telling him one lie after another and finally said, "I have to go. I have something else to do before bed. See you tomorrow. Bye." "Bye, honey. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night. I love you." Kevin hung up without saying a word to her. He waited another 15 minutes, glancing patiently at his watch, then called room 612 at the Hyatt, but after 10 rings, no one answered. The next day, Kevin went to work at his usual time, but left early after lunch. He wanted to be home by the time Carrie arrived from the airport and be ready to meet her. He had no idea how it would happen, but he knew they wouldn't be spending the night under the same roof. One of them would find a new place to stay before nightfall, and he didn't care which one. He got home a little after 10 and knew he'd probably have to wait about an hour for her to arrive. Considering how bad he felt when he found out what was going on, he was surprised at how patiently he was waiting for her now. There was an emptiness in his chest, and he knew that tears were about to spill out, but he gathered his strength and forced himself to live the next couple of hours with dignity. He spent hours replaying their entire life together in his head, remembering only the good things. The letters and what had happened after he found them seemed like part of another world. They didn't fit in with his memories of Carrie. He was standing at the kitchen sink when he heard her open the front door. A moment later, he heard the wheels of her suitcase rolling down the hallway, approaching him and their last seconds as a couple. When she entered the kitchen, he didn't think she had noticed him. "Kevin, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work?" When she saw him, her face showed surprise, but now it was replaced by concern. "I was waiting for you, Carrie." He spoke very evenly, without emotion, and his face was just as impassive. She looked at him with even greater alarm and replied, "You were waiting for me. Why?" He didn't answer, but took the stapled envelope with the letters and threw it on the table in front of her. She looked at him again, then reached for the papers. Her worried look turned to curiosity, but that soon gave way to shock. Her face paled as she leafed through the first sheet and the rest of the pages, lingering on each one for only a fraction of a second. When she reached the last one, she threw them back on the table and stood there for a few moments until the color returned to her face. She didn't look at him as she said, "Well, you know." After hesitating for a few more seconds, she continued, "Where did you get this? It's from my work email." "Modem." That was all he could say as he had to stop to compose himself. Carrie quickly caught on and nodded. "The modem broke again and my email was still on the screen, right?" When Kevin was able to speak calmly, he said, "Yes. If it weren't for that, I probably would never have found out. You kept that whole story very well hidden." Carrie didn't answer and seemed to think for a moment, then slowly turned and took her cell phone out of her purse. A few seconds later, she was talking into the phone with her back to Kevin. "Hey, Kevin knows. It doesn't matter how he found out, does it?" "Yes. I'll call a taxi. I'll meet you there. Bye." She closed the phone, turned partially toward Kevin and said, "I'm leaving. I'm sorry you found out this way. I'll come back tomorrow for the rest of my things." She turned again to leave, taking her travel bag with her. Kevin stared at her back in bewilderment and exclaimed indignantly, "That's it? No explanation?" "All you regret is that I found out this way," Carrie replied. "What is there to explain? I've spent so much time with Bradley over the last 6 months that being with him has become completely normal for me. He treats me so well. You can't compare to him, Kevin. I'm so sorry." The tears that had been welling up burst forth when Kevin said, "I'm happy for you. How much money is he spending on you?" "I know about the purse, the earrings, and a few other things." Is that what this is all about? He had to stop talking because he was starting to lose control of his words. Carrie hesitated before answering. The gifts are only part of the deal. Bradley does everything big and I'm ready to live big. When she finished, she walked down the hall to their bedroom and stayed there for almost 5 minutes while Kevin tried to collect his thoughts. He found it very hard to believe that it was all about what Trey could give her. He knew they were far from living a wealthy life, but the Carrie he knew never complained. Could he have been so wrong about her? When she returned from the bedroom, she was carrying a bag filled with clothes. She must have called a taxi from the bedroom, because as soon as she entered the kitchen, there were two short honks outside. Without saying a word, Carrie gathered her travel bag and left the house. Kevin followed her silently, watching as the taxi driver hurried across the sidewalk to pick up her luggage. She got into the taxi and, waiting for the car to start, quickly glanced back at Kevin. He wasn't sure, but he thought she was crying. Back in the kitchen, Kevin asked, "What the hell just happened?" No one answered, and he sat down at the kitchen table and tried to make sense of the situation with his once loving wife. The next day, Saturday, Kevin was still in shock and couldn't believe that Carrie had walked out of their marriage, their home, and him so easily. Shortly after noon, she called and said she was coming to get the rest of her things. When she arrived, her father was with her, bringing their van and several empty boxes. While the two of them carried the boxes into the bedroom, Kevin went into the living room and sat down quietly on the sofa. A few minutes later, Sari's father, Joseph Kane, joined Kevin. They sat in silence for several minutes before Kevin spoke. "Did she tell you what's going on?" Kevin asked. Her father looked a little embarrassed, but finally replied, "I'm very sorry, Kevin. It seems she's already made up her mind. Her mother and I don't understand why she wants to leave you for her boss. We've never met this man, but he must be really wonderful if he's a better choice than you." Kevin was still confused and said, "I think it's what he can give her. That's all she said, and it doesn't make any sense." He looked at his father-in-law and continued, "I know it sounds wrong, but that's all I can say. She didn't tell me she loved him or that she didn't love me anymore." Joseph was silent for a moment, but finally asked, "Does it really matter?" Kevin thought before answering, "No, probably not. She's been sleeping with him regularly for several months. I can't forgive her, even if it seems like she wanted to." The two men continued to sit in silence until Carrie came out and said, "I took everything I wanted. You can do whatever you want with the rest. Give it away or throw it out." There were tears in her eyes as she quickly glanced around the living room and then went outside with one of the boxes. Her father followed her with another, then returned several times to collect the rest of the boxes. When they left, Kevin returned to his bedroom and noticed that there were still a few of her things left in the closet she had used. He opened the drawers of the dresser that had belonged to her and saw that there were a few things there as well. In the underwear drawer, there were still several sets that he remembered giving her for her birthday and Valentine's Day. He picked up one of the bras he had given her and threw it back into the drawer with disgust. She could have at least taken them with her and thrown them away. It feels like she wants to rub herself against them. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a couple of green trash bags. A few minutes later, he had folded the rest of her clothes into the bags and tied them shut to give to someone in need. Another bag containing the cosmetics and toiletries she had left in the bedroom and bathroom went into the trash. An hour later, there was no trace of Carrie ever having lived there. He knew he would probably find something else, but for now, he was satisfied with getting rid of the last obvious signs of her presence. He spent the rest of the day lying on the bed they had once shared, thinking about what he should do and various scenarios for revenge. In the end, he realized that although he was angry, he wasn't a cruel or vengeful person, and that he would be better off spending his energy on simply forgetting her, as difficult as that might be. The weekend flew by, though Kevin remembered almost nothing about it. He took a couple more packs, and now they lay in the trash can, stripped of their original contents. He knew that drinking himself into oblivion wasn't his style, but it was the only way he could get through the weekend. Trying to understand why Carrie had behaved the way she did was driving him crazy, and the only solution was to force himself to stop thinking about it. By Monday morning, he felt a little better, resigned to what had happened, whether he could explain it or not. On Monday and Tuesday, nothing bothered him at work. On Tuesday, he called Crosby and Knox to find out where to forward Carrie's mail. When he asked, he wasn't transferred, but a few minutes later the secretary returned and said that Carrie would email him everything he needed. Later that evening, when he checked his email, there was one message from Carrie's work address, containing only a forwarding address which he recognized as the address of the ninth floor apartment where Trey lived. Wednesday began as a normal workday for Kevin until he was called into his office by phone mid-morning. It was his bank demanding that he do something about a late mortgage payment. After a few minutes of heated discussion with the loan officer, Kevin discovered that both bank accounts he and Carrie had were empty. A few more questions revealed that a total of nearly $20,000 had been withdrawn from those accounts on Monday. Kevin found himself in a difficult position and, although he could hardly afford it, put all his affairs on hold for the time it would take to sort out the situation. His first move was to go to the law firm Crosby & Knox. He was furious with Carrie and intended to insist that half the money be returned to the accounts. In his opinion, she had stolen nearly $10,000 from him. He was on the verge of a nervous breakdown when he entered the law firm, walked past the secretary, and headed straight for Carrie's desk. She didn't notice him and jumped when he spoke loudly to her from 3 meters away. "What the hell did you do with the money from our bank accounts? I want half of that money back right now." Bradley Knox III came out of his office to see what was going on, and as soon as Kevin saw him, he changed direction and headed toward the lawyer in the triple-breasted suit. Kevin managed to get within 2 feet of him, but at that moment, the door to his office slammed shut. He heard the bolt turn when he pulled the handle. Obviously, the conversation with Trey wasn't going to happen anytime soon. He quickly turned to Carrie just in time to stop her from walking away from the desk. She quickly sat down in her seat, her face and neck bright red, her embarrassment evident. "Well, where's my money, Carrie? What are you doing? Are you so desperate for money that you're willing to take what isn't yours?" Kevin was practically shouting, and everyone in the office was listening to him and beginning to gather discreetly nearby, wanting to know what was going on. Carrie finally found the strength to say, "I'm taking the money, and you can keep the car, the house, and the furniture." She rummaged through a stack of envelopes and packages waiting for the courier and pulled out one envelope, which she shoved into his hand. "Here's everything, and if you want to argue, hire a lawyer. I really hoped you'd get this before you discovered the money was missing, and I think you'll find it quite fair." As soon as he opened the envelope, 2 security guards with stun guns on their belts rushed over to him. One of them said, "You'd better leave. If you don't leave immediately, you'll be charged. We have the right to use these stun guns, so don't resist." Kevin realized that if he didn't do as they said, nothing good would come of it, so he turned to leave, saying, "You've turned into a greedy bitch. I don't understand how you could have changed so much. The Carrie I remember wouldn't have done this." He glanced again at Carrie's locked office and shouted, "Stay in your office, Trey, you coward." He noticed that several of Carrie's colleagues giggled at his remark, clearly enjoying the timid lawyer's reaction to Kevin's visit. Returning to his car, he opened the envelope. He quickly realized that Carrie had given Trey all the details about their assets and liabilities, and he had entered them into a spreadsheet which showed that if she took the money and he kept the car, the house, and the furniture, everything would be divided equally between them. They had very few liabilities other than the mortgage and credit card debt. The table indicated that each would be responsible for their own credit card debt, so at least that was one thing they didn't have to worry about. Looking closely at the numbers, he realized that it all depended on whether he was willing to accept his share as a stake in an overvalued house, with furniture that was hardly worth what they were both asking for it. He realized that if he tried to get his $20,000 share in cash, it would never happen because their figures did not include the real estate agent's fees and legal expenses for selling the house. Everything looked good on paper, which was exactly what he expected from the creditor's lawyer. Putting the documents back in the envelope, Kevin drove to his bank, where he was able to secure a line of credit that would cover the remaining mortgage payment and all other expenses until he received his next paycheck and put it in his account. He hoped he could manage the mortgage, the new loan, and all his household expenses until he sorted everything out. He could always count on his savings to help him cope with fluctuations in income or unexpected expenses that arose from time to time. He knew it would take at least a couple of months to get things under control. Kevin spent the next 2 weeks on an emotional high. The day after Crosby and Knox visited, he received an official letter warning him to stay away from Carrie and Bradley Knox or face charges of stalking, as well as an order to stay at least 100 yards away from them. This angered him so much that he almost decided to remind them that it was a bluff, but in the end, he realized that it would probably backfire on him. A week later, his anger returned when he received notification that Carrie had filed for divorce, using the terms of the agreement they had both sent him in the spreadsheet. That $200 and a few more hours of lost wages resulted in another lawyer in a triple-breasted suit telling him that while the agreement might not be entirely fair, he would spend more fighting for it than it was worth. When the letters and notices from Carrie and Trey stopped coming, Kevin's life began to settle down. 3 weeks after Carrie left, he realized that he still needed to work on erasing her memory from his home. Every time he walked into his bedroom, he saw her sitting at the dressing table she always used, or lying on the bed with a book, one of her favorite pastimes. He began rearranging the furniture in the house to create a new atmosphere. First, he removed the dressing table and took it to the basement for storage. He discovered that he could rearrange the furniture in the bedroom to give the room a new look that he and Carrie never had. In the bathroom, he was able to remove some of the decorations she had hung on the walls and give the room a new look. When he was finished, he felt lighter and was able to call the house his own. During the renovations, he realized that there were even more obvious reminders of Carrie that he would have to deal with. These were photos of her, or the two of them, hanging on several walls, standing on nightstands, and on the mantelpiece in the living room. One evening, he decided to remove all these photos and reminders of her, went through the entire house, took the photos out of their frames, and put them in a box he found in the basement. When he was done, he moved on to their collection of photo albums, which were stored in a bookcase in the living room. The first album he picked up contained almost exclusively photos of them, and after removing a few pictures of himself alone or with friends that he still cherished, he put the album with the rest of the photos in the box. The next album was from their wedding, and the only photos he kept were of him and his parents. They had died after the wedding, and these photos were the last ones he had left. He put the rest of the albums in the box as well. He continued flipping through the pages of the remaining albums, removing most of the photos and then folding the albums into the box. The last album he took from the shelf contained mostly photos he had brought into their marriage. Many of them were from his childhood and school years, but there were also a few photos of Carrie, which he took out and added to the pile in the box. Leafing through the album of memories from his younger years, he came across one photo that made him pause. It was of him with Carol Reese, his girlfriend for most of his school years. He wondered what she was doing now, and what had become of her after she left for college. They had broken up when she left, and he had gone to technical school while Carrie went to college. The entire album was neatly placed back on the shelf, and a small stack of photos he had saved from other albums was placed on top to be added later. For now, he decided he had done enough and would return to the photos another day. He had managed to get rid of the last reminders of Carrie, although that didn't stop him from thinking about her throughout the day, and especially at night when he lay in their marital bed. Before going to sleep, he took out the local phone book and looked up the Reese family. Carol wasn't there, which didn't surprise him, but neither was her widowed mother, Mariana Reese. He remembered their address, but it wasn't listed under either of the Reese names. There were only a few entries for the Reese family in the book, and none of them had anything to do with his memories of Carol. Satisfying his curiosity, he put the book away and thought no more about the only woman who had ever meant anything to him. About 6 weeks after Carrie had hurriedly left his life, Kevin was torn from his nightly TV sessions by a knock on the door. Night after night, he had sat watching programs that meant nothing to him except as a way to fill the time between dinner and bed. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see Carrie's brother, Robert Kane. "Hello, Robert. Come in. I wasn't expecting you." Kevin stepped aside to let Carrie's older brother into the house. After letting Kevin pass, Robert turned, patted his brother-in-law on the shoulder, and said, "How's it going, Kevin? I tried to call you, but your answering machine said your number was no longer in service." "Oh yeah, I got rid of my landline, and now I only use my cell phone. I don't see the point in the extra expense." Kevin led the man into the living room, where they settled into different armchairs. "Can I offer you a beer, Robert?" "Sure, Kevin, I'd love one." Kevin left for a moment and returned with 2 open bottles, handing one to his old friend. I don't think you'll need a glass." "No, I won't." Both men took a swig from their bottles, then Kevin asked, "So what brought you here? I thought you wouldn't show up after Carrie left." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, then said, "Actually, that's exactly why I'm here. You know she was my wife's best friend for a long time, and 2 days ago, Carrie went over to visit her. I told Carrie that I thought she had cheated on you with her boss, and then Carrie and Susan went into the kitchen to talk alone. I went out to the garage because I was too angry with her to stay there. Thanks for confiding in me, Robert, but I don't want to get between you and your sister. What's done is done, and I'm trying to move on. Well, she's my little sister, and I know it'll come between us eventually, but right now I don't need her. I know my parents aren't thrilled either, but they'll support her no matter what. Kevin looked grimly at his beer and said, Family comes first. Robert continued. Anyway, I left the kitchen door ajar when I went to the garage and I overheard their conversation. Although I wasn't interested in talking to her, I decided to listen to what Carrie had to say. I walked over, sat down by the kitchen door, and just listened. Kevin was clearly interested in Robert's story, so he leaned forward and asked, Did she say anything? I'm still trying to figure out what she saw in that guy besides his money. I think you hit the nail on the head. I can't quote them word for word, but I can convey the gist of their conversation. When you caught her writing to him, she quickly decided to dump you and go back to her boss. She realized you would never forgive her, so she went with Plan B. Wasn't she already with him? Kevin asked, looking a little confused. From what I heard, it seems not. She told Susan that the gifts and lifestyle with Bradley were wonderful, but that you were much better in bed. She said she would have broken up with him very soon, maybe even next week if you hadn't caught her. Would've, could've, should've. It doesn't matter now. Kevin took another swig from the bottle and leaned back in his chair. She understands that. She knows it's over. I just thought you'd be interested to know that she's very sorry about it all. That certainly didn't stop her from continuing with the divorce proceedings. I got new papers from the court today. Looks like Trey has a judge who's speeding things up for her. She didn't mention that to me, but I heard them both use the expression husband on the side. It seems like they've talked about it before, and when she first started dating him, she thought he would be a stepping stone for her. The thing is, Susan obviously knew about all this from the beginning. I'm so upset about Susan that I'm afraid to talk to her about it because I don't know what to say. So she thinks I'm her future husband, isn't that wonderful? Kevin paused to control his anger before continuing. I don't want you to fight with Susan over me, Robert. Carrie wasn't the only one who thought so. From the tone of their conversation, it sounded like Susan might have been thinking the same thing as Carrie. I'll talk to her about all this soon as I feel I can talk to her without losing my temper. My wife has a lot to answer for. The conversation continued for another half hour, after which Robert got up to leave. He added a few more minor details from the conversation he had overheard, but nothing significant happened to Kevin, and he was still thinking about his first husband when he finally fell asleep a couple of hours later. The next day after work, Kevin stopped at a large grocery store on his way home. He decided it was time to start eating healthier food than the fast food he had been eating for the past 6 weeks. He had just put his cart in line at the checkout when the cashier asked, Are you Kevin Riley? Kevin looked up and immediately recognized his former classmate. Hi, Wendy. I didn't know you worked here. Long time no see. They continued their pleasant conversation while Wendy checked his order. After paying, Kevin asked, Wendy, you were very close to Carol Reese. Have you heard anything about what happened to her or her mother? Wendy thought for a moment before answering. I remember hearing that she got married, but that was many years ago. Her mother still lives in the same house, although she remarried a few years ago. I didn't hear about that. Do you know Mrs. Reese's new last name? Wendy thought about it some more and replied, Smith, I think, maybe Smiteman or Smithson. Agreeing to meet sometime for coffee, the old friend said goodbye. When he got home, Kevin was in a better mood than he had been in a long time. Seeing his old friend had brought back many fond memories, and he was grateful for any distraction from thoughts of his soon-to-be ex-wife. After preparing a healthy dinner, he went for a short run for the first time in weeks to prepare for what would become his new habit, eating right and exercising regularly. Shortly after returning from his run, he decided to find Carol's mother's phone number and quickly found it in the phone book under the name Smiters. Realizing that time was of the essence, he dialed the number. Soon, Kevin was on that phone with Mariana Smiters and got straight to the point. I wanted to know Carol's address. I thought I could write to her just to say hello. I was just about to go to her house. Her name is Carol Jansen now, and you don't need to write to her. Just give her a call. She gave him her phone number and added that Carol was now a widow. Since she was in a hurry, they said goodbye quickly. After their conversation, Kevin looked up Carol Jansen in the phone book and noticed that her address was in an area known for being a low-income, troubled neighborhood. This surprised him greatly, and he wondered why Carol lived there at all. He decided that he would definitely call her someday. Over the next few days, Kevin changed. His new healthy lifestyle affected his outlook on life, and he was now much more optimistic at work. He began to imagine that life without Carrie was possible after all. Just as he was starting to feel better, a new letter from Carrie made him think. It was a very short letter, consisting of just one line. I never considered you a husband on the first try. It was obvious that Robert and Susan had discussed what Robert had been thinking about when he broke up with Kevin a few days earlier. Susan had apparently passed on to Kevin the information Robert had overheard in the women's conversation. This message brought back everything Kevin had been trying to forget. After thinking about her message for a few minutes, he replied, "Actions speak louder than words." She never responded to his comment. Almost exactly 3 months after Carrie left their home to be with Trey, Kevin received the final divorce papers. He was surprised by Trey's ability to get the papers through the system. Returning from his usual jog, he celebrated his newly single status with a glass of cold beer. After finishing it, he went to his computer and sent Carrie a message. "You got what you wanted." That was the last message between them, and she never replied. Later that evening, after rereading and filing the divorce papers, Kevin decided it was time to call Carol Jensen and say hello. He had thought about calling her several times over the past few weeks, but he wasn't ready to take that step yet. Since he was divorced and she was a widow, he thought maybe they could have dinner together or have a drink or two to reminisce about old times. With that in mind, he dialed her number. When she answered, he only had time to introduce himself before she said, "Kevin, I'm so glad you called. Mom said you called, and I was starting to think you weren't going to." The two old friends spent the next hour telling each other about the most memorable events in their lives since graduating from college. Kevin learned that Carol had married Frank Jansen during her senior year of college. He had served in the National Guard and had been called up for duty in Iraq. 3 months after he arrived there, she received word that a man on a bicycle had blown himself up at the checkpoint her husband was guarding, killing him and another soldier. This left her a widow with a 4-year-old daughter, Chrissy. They lived on the survivor's pension she received from the Army, but once her daughter was old enough to go to school, Carol planned to return to her career as a therapist. Kevin, for his part, told Carol about his new status and some details of how and why he had recently divorced. Eventually, it was time to say goodbye as Carol had to put her daughter to bed. Kevin decided that now was the right moment to ask Carol if she would like to go on a date with him. "So, Carol, how would you feel about dinner or a drink sometime?" Carol hesitated before replying, "I'm sorry, Kevin, but I don't think I'm ready for that. My daughter is my main concern right now. Maybe another time." Kevin was very disappointed because he thought they would get back together after so many years. "It's okay, Carol. I hope I didn't upset you by asking." "Goodbye and good luck, Carol." Her response really upset him, and he quickly hung up the phone. The fact that he was officially divorced and then rejected by his ex-girlfriend made him go back to the refrigerator for another bottle of beer. And after he finished it, he immediately went to bed. It had been an emotionally difficult day for him. The next 2 months flew by unnoticed. Kevin got used to the routine and realized that sooner or later he would have to decide what to do with the rest of his life. He knew there was no point in starting a new relationship, so he put that part of his life on hold, deciding to wait until Carrie faded from his consciousness. He still found it difficult to go more than a few hours without thinking about her, although he noticed that these recurring memories bothered him less and less. Kevin had given up his newspaper delivery a few months ago when he had canceled his landline and cable TV in an effort to cut back on expenses. Now he preferred to read the newspapers left in the break room by his coworkers, who didn't often bring them to work. Sometimes he listened to the local news on the radio, but again, not regularly. In this uninformed state, he went to work that morning. During his morning coffee break, he was engrossed in a lively work conversation with another mechanic when one of them threw a newspaper in front of him and said, "You better read this, Kevin." Kevin picked up the newspaper and read the headline, "One dead, one in critical condition." The article reported on a fatal car accident that had occurred the previous evening on the road leading from a local country club. The driver lost control of the car, which flew into a ditch and rolled over several times. The driver, identified as Bradley Knox III, was thrown from the car. The passenger, Carrie Riley, was seriously injured and is now in intensive care at a local hospital. Police say the accident was likely caused by drunk driving. After reading the article twice, Kevin threw the newspaper back to the man who had given it to him and said, "I can't say I'm sorry he died. I hope Carrie survives, but other than that, I care too much about her to worry about him." The man looked at him intently and then said, "Are you sure, Kevin? I know her passing hit you hard. You were completely useless for a while," he said with a laugh. "Yes, I'm sure that's true. Reading that article convinced me of that." Now I feel only normal human compassion for her. I have no desire whatsoever to rush to her bedside. Reading that article was a turning point for Kevin. He could now admit to himself that he had indeed been experiencing memories of Carrie, and he felt a heavy weight lift off his shoulders. As much as he felt sorry for her and her parents, he was happy to have reached the point where he realized he could move on with his life. Over the next few days, local media confirmed that Bradley Knox III had been under the influence of alcohol when he veered off the road. The same report said that Carrie was still unconscious and in critical condition. Kevin responded to the news by inviting one of his secretaries to dinner, and they both gladly accepted the invitation. He was very happy to enjoy the company of this woman again. They had no plans for the future, but it was enough for Kevin that he had completely broken out of the rut he had been in for so long. About 2 weeks after the accident, when there was no news about her, Kevin opened the door when someone knocked late in the evening and saw Robert Kane. He invited him in, and soon the two men were sitting in the kitchen with a bottle of cold beer in their hands. "What brought you here, Robert? Long time no see." "Nothing much, Kevin. Just in the neighborhood, as they say." "I'm so sorry about the accident. I imagine it's been very hard on your family." "I haven't seen anything in the papers. Is she feeling any better?" Robert took a long sip of beer before answering. "Yeah, Mom and Dad are having a really hard time. She suffered a pretty serious head injury when she was thrown back when the car was moving. Thank God she was wearing her seatbelt. The bastard she was riding with wasn't wearing one and paid for it. Sounds like Carrie paid dearly for his decision to drive drunk. Someone should sue his estate for her injuries." Robert sighed and said, "Yes, my father and I talked about it. Carrie is still in an induced coma. She had to undergo serious brain surgery because of the blow to her head. Once the swelling goes down, they'll take her off life support and see if she comes out of the coma. They're not giving any guarantees." "I didn't know she was in such bad shape. The news always said she was in intensive care. Give my regards to your parents when you see them." Robert looked at Kevin and said, "I will. Thanks for your concern. They were very surprised that you didn't come to the hospital. I tried to explain to them that you have your own life now and that Carrie is no longer a part of it." Kevin laughed quietly and said, "Yeah, I think I've been able to move on now. I went on my first date in years the other day. I'm really sorry she was hurt so badly, but I'm not going to let it affect my life. A year ago, I would have lost my mind in a situation like that, but Carrie didn't let me." They continued talking about sports and work and didn't return to the subject of Carrie until the very end of Robert's visit. As he was about to leave, he said, "By the way, Kevin, I think Susan and I have worked through the problem I told you about last time. She saw how bad Carrie was before the accident and decided she'd be happy to be my wife. I guess it's one of those cases where the grass is always greener." "I'm glad to hear that, Robert. Maybe it was Carrie who confused Susan. Deep down, Carrie forgot about her commitment to me and our marriage. It could have been much worse. We could have had children." They shook hands and Robert went home. Another 6 weeks flew by for Kevin without incident. He heard nothing about what had happened to Carrie and assumed that her recovery was going well. Kevin began to socialize more with girls and went out on average once a week. He met with Jean, the administrator at work, several times and spent a couple of nights at her apartment. Neither of them expected their relationship to go too far, but they both enjoyed the time they spent together. The nights he spent in her bed helped him get rid of his last doubts about going back to dating. It was Thursday evening, and Kevin had just returned from his evening run when he heard the doorbell ring. Opening the door, he was very surprised to see his former father-in-law standing on his doorstep. "Come in, Joseph. What do I owe you for this unexpected visit?" The elderly man stopped at the door and said, "I can't come in. I'm in a hurry to get to the hospital. I would like to ask you to come to the hospital and see Carrie, her mother, and me. She finally arrived this week. We were hoping you could meet us tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." Kevin looked at him curiously and replied, "I think I can. But what's going on? Why do you need me to visit her? Our marriage has been over for a long time." Joseph sighed with relief and said, "We just wanted you to meet us there if you can. Then we can discuss everything. I'm in a hurry right now. See you tomorrow." The elderly man quickly turned around and hurried to his car, leaving Kevin standing at his own door in bewilderment. The next day, Kevin rearranged his schedule to have lunch later and start his weekend early, heading to the hospital as agreed. And so it happened. He left the store at 1 o'clock p.m. and, without stopping for lunch, snacked on fruit from his bag on the way. He arrived at the hospital early but decided to go up to Carrie's room anyway. Maybe he could do it even faster than he had planned. It was 2:30 when he got out of the elevator on Carrie's floor. He had been given the room number at the reception desk on the first floor, and he immediately saw that it was right across from the nurse's station. He hadn't noticed it affecting him before, but now it was obvious that he was indeed a little nervous. He hadn't seen Carrie since he had stormed into her office on Crosby and Knox, and he hadn't even exchanged emails with her in months. He was sure it would be a difficult experience for him. Taking a deep breath, he quietly approached the open door of her room and froze, staring intently at the scene before him. Carrie was clearly asleep, her shoulder-length blonde hair cut to just 2 inches, obviously shorn off a few weeks ago before her operation. There was at least one scar visible on the right side of her head, not yet completely hidden by her regrowing hair. To her right stood an infusion pump connected to an IV in her right arm. To her left was a stand with heart monitoring equipment. The screen displayed a steady pulse, as well as numbers showing her heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen percentage. A bundle of wires stretched from the machine to sensors attached to her body. So, as not to wake her, Kevin decided to wait for her parents to arrive. He was very happy to see her again. She was as beautiful as ever, with no signs of the accident on her face, neck, or hands. Only the scar on her head bore witness to the terrible accident she had survived. For a moment, he wanted to go over and take her hand, but that desire quickly passed when he remembered the contents of the letters he had found so long ago. He clenched his jaw and reaffirmed his intention to wait. He watched her for about 2 minutes when her eyes slowly opened and focused on him. As if a switch had been turned on, her face suddenly brightened and she said, "Kevin, you're here. Where have you been? I've missed you so much these last 3 days. No one could tell me where you were." Kevin was completely stunned by her reaction and questions and replied, "Where do you think I was? I was at home and at work." Carrie responded to this answer with confusion and asked, "Why weren't you here when I woke up? Why did you go to work or stay home when I was here?" He was even more confused than she was and was a little angry at her questions. He quickly replied, "Why were you waiting for me here? We're divorced. You left me for your lover. Why the hell should I visit you? I'm only here because your parents wanted me to come." Her reaction completely surprised and shocked Kevin, and she immediately screamed and tried to move toward him. She was clearly very upset and said, "No, no, no. What are you saying?" She began waving her arms, trying to free herself from the straps and tubes. A few seconds later, she ripped the IV out of her right arm. The alarm on the infusion pump sounded continuously, soon joined by the loud, piercing beep of the heart monitoring equipment when Carrie managed to yank the cables and disconnect them from the machine. A few seconds after the alarm sounded, 2 nurses rushed in from the next room. The first one looked at Kevin and asked, "What did you do to her?" Then she ran past him to Carrie, grabbed her twitching hands, and forced her back onto the bed. She ignored Kevin's reply. "I didn't do anything. I've been here the whole time by the door." Carrie was mumbling something incoherently, trying to break free from the nurse's strong grip. The second nurse quickly assessed the situation and said, "I'll get a sedative and call the doctor to see if we can put her to sleep." She turned and hurried out of the room. Kevin slowly left the room, finally turning around and shaking his head as he headed for the elevator. "I think she's crazy," he said to no one in particular. As he approached the elevator, the doors opened and Sari's parents stepped out in front of Kevin. Before they could say a word to him, they heard screams and cries coming from Carrie's room, and their attention was drawn to a nurse who ran into the room with a pair of restraints and a syringe in her hands. "What happened?" Carrie's mother looked at Kevin in alarm and continued, "You didn't talk to her, did you?" When he answered in the affirmative, she said, "Oh my God, no." And they both rushed past him into the room. Kevin was completely confused by the strange situation unfolding before him, and after watching and listening for a few seconds, he reached out and pressed the elevator button. As he stepped into the elevator and the doors began to close, he saw Sari's father come out of the room, clearly looking for him. Kevin managed to raise his hand in farewell before the doors closed completely. Satisfied that he had managed to start his weekend even earlier than he had expected, Kevin drove home immediately after leaving the hospital. On the way, he replayed the strange scenes that had unfolded before his eyes in Carrie's room. None of it made any sense to him, and he decided to forget about it. He tried to fulfill Joseph Kane's request, but Carrie's reaction to his visit quickly put an end to his attempts. He was sure she was still suffering from psychological problems after the accident, which he was happy to leave to her parents and doctors to deal with. Let them figure it out themselves, he decided. After showering and changing, A thought that had been on his mind on and off for the past few weeks came back to him. He decided to call Carol Jensen one last time, hoping she would change her mind and agree to have dinner with him. If she refused again, he decided to call Jean at the office and invite her over for the evening. He felt he needed female company to take his mind off Carrie and her strange behavior. He was about to hang up when the phone rang. Not sure if he wanted to hear Carol's refusal again, but that opportunity disappeared when Carol picked up. "Hi, Carol. It's Kevin Riley. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Kevin, no. I'm not busy at all. I'm so glad you called again. I tried calling you several times, but the number listed in the directory doesn't work. I was afraid you had moved or something. I wanted to apologize for being so harsh with you when you last asked me out. I got rid of that phone and now I only use my cell. You don't have to apologize, Carol. I'm old enough to handle rejection," he said. "Actually, I called to see if you'd changed your mind and wanted to have dinner with me tonight or tomorrow night." He waited patiently for her to come up with an excuse. Carol hesitated before answering. "I have plans with my mom and stepdad tomorrow. It's their anniversary." After another pause, she continued, "I'm afraid tonight won't work either because I couldn't find a babysitter for Chrissy on such short notice." She was genuinely upset that she had to turn him down. "You know, there's a simple solution. We can take Chrissy with us. You've told me so much about her. I'd really like to meet her." Kevin decided that if she came up with any more excuses, it would be clear that she wasn't interested in going out with him. Carol laughed and said, "I doubt you've ever been to a restaurant with a 4-year-old girl, have you? If you bring a child with you, your choice of restaurants is very limited." "Well, maybe we can find a place where she'll be comfortable. I just know I want to ask you out, and a family restaurant seems like a great option." He waited patiently for her answer, knowing that it was now or never. Deep down, he really wanted her to say yes. He believed that they had unfinished business. Their breakup after college had been caused by the realities of the academic program, not by a clear mismatch of feelings. If you're serious, there's a restaurant that Chrissy really likes. The food is delicious, and the atmosphere is nice, even though it's a family restaurant. They have a great dessert bar that Chrissy just loves. Then it's settled. I'll pick you up at 5. You have to tell me where it is." Kevin was very pleased, and his joy was evident in his voice. Carol was also excited and replied, "You don't mind taking Chrissy, are you sure?" Kevin laughed and replied, "Of course. If she's anything like her mother, I'm sure she'll be a pleasure to spend time with. You've always struck me as one of the most polite and well-mannered people I've ever met." They continued chatting until Carol said she had to go so they could both get ready. Kevin was thrilled with the conversation. He was happier than he had been in a long time. He sincerely hoped that their evening would be everything he had imagined. Later that evening, lying in bed and waiting for sleep to overcome him, Kevin replayed the details of his date with Carol and Chrissy in his mind. He lay there smiling, pleased with how everything had gone. Now he was looking forward to Sunday morning because he had agreed to accompany them both to church, a Sunday ritual he had given up many years ago. It wasn't that he particularly wanted to hear the sermon. He just wanted to spend more time with the 2 women from the Jensen family he had just invited to dinner. He remembered the beginning of the evening when he drove up to Carol's house. He was struck by the beauty of the woman who greeted him at the door. She had changed so much since he had last seen her, and it had been more than 10 years. Her dark hair was now cut short, which suited her very well. For some reason, she seemed taller, but he was sure it was just a trick of memory. She had filled out in all the right places, but the beautiful smile and dark eyes he remembered were still the same. When he saw her for the first time, he had stopped breathing. Chrissy looked like a miniature version of her mother with the same dark hair and eyes. Carol said she had her father's nose and chin, but Kevin thought that even those features made her look more like her mother. Chrissy shook his hand gently when they were introduced, and he noticed that she was looking at him intently. So intently that Kevin wondered if the child would mind if he showed interest in her mother. He had heard of several cases where incompatibility with children had doomed any relationship between their parents and a potential suitor. His fears quickly dissipated when Chrissy agreed to hold his hand as they walked from Carol's car to the restaurant. They took her car so they wouldn't have to switch the car seat, and he drove while Carol navigated and Chrissy commented from the back seat. By the time they arrived, Kevin had already taken a liking to the headstrong girl. Their dinner went very well, and they found plenty to talk about. Chrissy often joined in the conversation, usually asking, "What does empty mean?" Where empty was a word one of them had used, but she didn't quite understand. Kevin found this habit of hers quite amusing. and Carol thought that the frequent interruptions seemed to embarrass her slightly. When the main course was finished, Kevin persuaded Chrissy to go with him to the dessert table, where they chose and ordered the desserts they wanted. Carol ordered ice cream with chocolate sauce, and Kevin persuaded Chrissy to order the same thing as her mother. Kevin's choice was simple: a slice of apple pie with ice cream, and Chrissy managed it again with his encouragement. She took the longest to choose her dessert, as she couldn't decide which of the three toppings to put on her ice cream, and Kevin became her friend for life when he suggested she have all three. The drive to Carol's was a continuation of the pleasant time they had had at the restaurant. Kevin walked them to Carol's apartment door, but all his thoughts of hugging or kissing her goodbye vanished when Chrissy took her mother's hand and pulled her along until she agreed to take the girl to her room, bathe her, and read her a book before bed. It was already late Sunday afternoon when Carol stopped by Kevin's house to take him home after church and a late breakfast at IHOP. Chrissy was busy talking about animals, and Kevin didn't notice that someone was waiting for him until Carol said, "I think someone's at your door." Kevin looked around and said, "That's my ex-father-in-law and mother-in-law. I wonder what they want. I'll go see." Chrissy quickly got his attention back, saying, "Don't forget to take me to the zoo." She seemed worried that the unexpected guests might interfere with their plans for the day. "I won't forget, Chrissy. Get changed, and I'll pick you up for the zoo, I promise." He smiled at the girl and her mother before getting out of the car. He stood and waved goodbye as they drove away, then turned to his guests and asked, "What brings you here on such a beautiful Sunday?" Carrie's mother, Nancy, spoke first. "We need to talk to you. It's very important." She looked upset. "Of course. I'm leaving around 2, but we can come in for coffee and talk if you want." They went into the house and joined Kevin in the kitchen, where he started making coffee. They sat down at the table, and Nancy Kane began to speak. "Carrie is in terrible shape, Kevin. Ever since you came into our lives, she's been on a steady dose of tranquilizers. As soon as the medication wears off and she comes to, she becomes hysterical. What's the reason for that, and what does it have to do with me? When we asked you to meet with us on Friday, we wanted you to meet with her neurologist first. We wanted him to explain to you what condition she's in. I'm sorry, I didn't know. But what difference does it make? I didn't tell her anything." Nancy began to cry, and her husband took her hand before she continued. "The problem is that you told her about her affair and divorce. We wanted to avoid that until she was stronger." Kevin was puzzled and quickly asked, "Why shouldn't I have mentioned her affair and divorce?" "She didn't expect me to forget about it now that Trey is dead. She's not going to take me back just because he's gone." Kevin began to get a little angry at the implication. Joseph continued. "Carrie suffered a serious head injury and nearly died. Part of her temporal lobe was physically damaged, and the swelling could have affected other areas. Her doctor explained to us that she is suffering from retrograde amnesia." "Amnesia? How is that possible? She recognized me right away. I assume she recognized you two as well." "It's not that she lost all her memory. The problem is that she lost almost all her memories from the past year and a half, as well as scattered memories from earlier periods. When she was admitted to the hospital, the doctors ran a lot of tests and found that she has large gaps in her memory of the recent past. She thinks you two just got back from Cancun." While Joseph was talking, Kevin poured coffee into 3 cups, and Joseph paused to take a sip from his cup. "They think that over time she'll be able to remember a lot more of what she's lost, but they don't know when or how much she'll get back. She's like the main character in The Bourne Identity." "You mean she doesn't remember the divorce or even her affair?" "I could lie to her, but eventually I'd have to tell her the truth. Like I said, she's not getting a pass just because Trey died." Joseph couldn't wait to continue and said, "We shouldn't lie to her. If we do, she may form memories that aren't true." The doctor explained that we had to tell her the truth in order to restore the memories that were still there. Her mind would fill in the gaps if something was missing, but if we told her something completely untrue, her mind might incorporate it as a false memory. Kevin looked confused and said, "So we're back to square one. You're saying I should have told her about the affair and the divorce?" "Not exactly. In situations like this, the doctor advised not to lie, but simply to avoid the truth. He wanted us to start giving her bits and pieces of information so she could put the puzzle together correctly." "You're kind of overwhelming her with information. The doctor thinks that some of this information may have triggered memories of the affair and divorce, but we don't know yet how much." Nancy Kane came to her senses and said, "She's not very strong emotionally yet. The news you gave her was very upsetting." She's going to be put on a different medication and hopefully we'll be able to talk to her again soon. During the conversation, Kevin felt a little ashamed of what he had said. I'm sorry if I made things worse. I didn't realize what she was going through. It's okay, Kevin. We hope you can help us bring back some of her lost memories. We'd like to take all your photo albums, as the doctors say that photos can trigger memories that will help her reconnect with some of the people she's lost. Anything you have that might help her remember would also be helpful. Hearing about the photo albums, Kevin stood up and walked over to the kitchen sink, where he stood looking out the window. I can't help you with the albums. They're not here. Nancy looked puzzled and asked, What do you mean they're not here? I mean they're not here. They went out with the trash a few months ago. He turned and walked down the hall saying, I can explain everything if I print out the letter for you. He left for a few minutes, during which time Sari's parents comforted each other. When he returned, Kevin was holding a printed sheet of paper which he showed to the elderly couple. A few months ago, I deleted all the photos I wanted to keep from our albums. A few days after that, I sent the following message to Sari's work email address. I deleted all the photos I wanted to keep from our albums. I put the ones that were left in a box so you could do the same. Let me know where to send them, there or to the apartment. That's exactly the response I got from her. Do whatever you want with them. I don't need them. I kept them for a few more weeks, but in the end I decided that if she didn't want them and I didn't either, I might as well throw them out with the trash. So that's what I did. I'm sorry. Shock and horror were written all over Joseph and Nancy's faces. They couldn't say anything, and after thinking about the situation, Kevin added, Besides this message, I have something else I can give you. I'll go get it. It'll take about 15 minutes, so help yourselves to some more coffee. Kevin went to the computer room and returned just 15 minutes later. When he came back to the kitchen table, he was holding a stack of papers and a CD in a box. I printed out all the letters that told me about the affair. Maybe if Carrie reads them, it will bring back some memories for her. He placed the stack in front of Nancy, who reached out to take them and start reading. Kevin immediately snatched them from her hands and said, Some of these letters are very candid. I'm not sure you should read them because I know the effect they had on me, but consider yourself warned if you decide to read them. He added copies of all the legal letters that had been sent to him, including the warning letter after his visit to the Crosby and Knox office. The last item was a CD labeled Cancun. He handed it to them and said, These photos were on the computer, and they're all I have left from our time together. I should warn you about this too. Carrie and I went to a nude beach, and all these photos were taken there. Actually, there's one photo where we're dressed and sitting in beach chairs on the beach. Carrie will probably look at the rest herself. Carrie's mother folded the papers and the CD in front of her. Kevin thought it was awfully little to sum up their marriage. He hoped it would help Carrie. They sat in silence for a few seconds before Nancy said, I don't think you want to go to Carrie and tell her everything that happened between you. Kevin thought for a moment before replying, I don't think so, at least not right now. If she wants to talk to me after she reads all this and realizes what she's done to our marriage, give me a call and I might consider it. I suppose you can't try to start over with her, her father said, hope in his voice. I'm afraid I could never do that. I've spent all these months trying to get over my feelings for her, and I can't risk her changing her mind and doing the same thing to me again. She chose Trey's wealth and status in society over me, and I'll never give her the chance to do that to me a second time. Something in her nature allowed her to do that, and I can't believe that a blow to the head could change that trait. Even if I could believe it was possible, I wouldn't risk it. Joseph and Nancy agreed that they understood how he felt about it. But they thanked him for offering to talk to Carrie later if she wanted to. The three of them were leaving the house, exchanging farewells, when Carol and her daughter appeared on the driveway. Chrissy immediately informed the elderly couple, We're going to the zoo. We're going to see the elephants. The Kansas couple hurried to greet the mother and daughter and took an even quicker look at them before getting into the car and driving away. Apologizing for not being ready, Kevin invited Carol and Chrissy to come into the house and wait while he changed. A couple of minutes later, he was ready, and the happy trio soon set off for the zoo. Another month passed, and Kevin was happier than ever. He saw Carol and Chrissy at least once a week, but they couldn't find a way to take their relationship to a sexual level. Chrissy had already rejected the idea several times. Her inability to sleep when he was in the apartment was starting to annoy Kevin. It must have been unpleasant for Carol as well, because she suggested finding a babysitter for their next date. The day arrived, and Kevin was eagerly awaiting it. They planned to go to the movies and then to a popular bar to dance, and Carol's mother agreed to watch Chrissy. In the evening, the happy couple left Carol's apartment. It was their first date alone. The movie and dancing went very well, and at midnight, Kevin suggested they go to his place for a cup of coffee since they were nearby. Carol smiled and agreed, but warned him that she couldn't count on her mother staying home late. When they entered the house, Kevin said, "If you prefer wine to coffee, I have a few bottles in the basement." Carol agreed that it was a good idea, and he quickly fetched a bottle for them to try. They had been drinking wine and dancing to his large CD collection for half an hour, when Kevin led her back to the sofa in the living room. After a couple of tender kisses, he broke free from her embrace and picked up his cell phone. "What are you doing?" Carol asked with a smile on her face. "I'm starting to like this." Kevin put his finger to her lips and said, "Give me a minute. I want to talk to your babysitter." Carol was shocked and tried to grab the phone, saying, "Don't bother my mom. Why are you calling her?" She was embarrassed and laughed, trying unsuccessfully to reach his cell phone. The call was answered quickly, and Carol stopped fighting for the phone when she heard Kevin say, "This is Kevin. Everything's fine, but I wanted to ask you something, Mrs. Smiters." "Okay, Marianne, I wanted to know if you'd like to come home soon. I was hoping Carol could stay a little longer. I understand." "Well, sounds great." There was another minute of silence before Kevin said, "I really like your thinking, Marianne. Yes, I'll tell her the same thing you said. But she doesn't need to wash the sheets, I'll do that myself." After another short pause, Kevin continued, "See you then. Did I tell you how much I like your way of thinking? Bye, Marianne." Kevin laughed as he ended the conversation, and Carol looked at him in confusion. "What was that, Kevin?" Kevin laughed loudly again, then said, "I'll tell you what we were talking about. I think I'm going to really like your mom. Not that I didn't like her before. We've always gotten along well." He paused and laughed again. "So tell me, Kevin, what did she say?" Carol was confused and clearly didn't understand what Kevin had told her on the phone. "Well, your stepfather, Gary, joined her at your apartment. Chrissy's fine and fast asleep. And your mom and Gary are doing the same thing we just did here on the couch. She told me he had a doctor's appointment today, and he stopped by your apartment to tell you he was prescribed some little blue pills." Kevin smirked again before continuing. "Your mom insists that you stay here tonight because they're going to sleep. In your bed." "Well, she didn't quite say it like that. She said they don't have any pajamas, so we'll have to sleep like this." Carol's face showed complete shock. "My mom would never say that. What are you doing to me?" Kevin laughed again, then said, "I forgot to mention that they enjoyed the bottle of wine you had in the cupboard. And I think Gary got your mom a little drunk. She said we're perfect for each other and you should forget about Frank. She wants you to stay here with me. And since you don't have any pajamas, she hopes there will be stains on the sheets in the morning. She asked me to tell you to change the sheets when you get up, but I told her I'd be happy to do it myself." He paused, smiled, and leaned down to kiss Carol. She blushed deeply and, breaking the kiss, said, "I can't believe she would say that, my own mother." She looked into Kevin's eyes, trying to answer the question she saw there. A few minutes later, they arrived. He smiled at her and said, "Don't let me forget to change the sheets in the morning. I'm sure your mom will ask about it when we meet them for breakfast." "Breakfast? What do you mean?" "Your mom wants us to meet them at IHOP for breakfast at 11 a.m. I think it'll be more like brunch. I think we can skip church this week. She said they're bringing Chrissy and that we have no reason not to stay up as late as we want." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Kevin was lying on the couch in the living room reminiscing about the wonderful evening and morning he had spent with Carol. Marianne, Gary, and Chrissy were already sitting at the table waiting for them. Both adults smiled when they entered the house, and Chrissy laughed and waved, happy to see her mother. When they sat down at the table, Kevin said, "Sorry we're late. I had to do the laundry." He laughed when Carol blushed and playfully slapped his hand. They continued in the same vein throughout dinner, constantly making jokes about blue pills, sheets, and wine. Chrissy looked at one of them several times with a questioning look in her eyes, and the adults seemed embarrassed by her. Later, as they said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Kevin kissed Carol and Chrissy, then hugged Marianne tightly. As he hugged her, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you so much for your advice last night. It was just the push we needed." Marianne smiled at him, then pulled him back to her so he could whisper in response, "I think you two are perfect for each other. You're exactly what she's been looking for, and Gary and I took the opportunity to test his recipe. She laughed, turned, took her husband by the arm and walked to Carol's car. Kevin stood in the parking lot waving as the four drove away, a smile playing on his face. Suddenly, his cell phone rang and he got up from the couch. Thinking it was Carol, he answered with a cheerful, "Hello? Kevin?" Kevin recognized Joseph Kane's voice and replied, "Yes, it's me. How can I help you, Joseph?" "Kevin, I'm calling about your offer to talk to Carrie once we've reviewed all the information you provided. She's at our house right now and asked us to invite you over for a cup of coffee to talk with you. She didn't want to call you herself because I think she's afraid you'll hang up on her." Kevin was very surprised by Joseph's call and hesitated before answering. "I think I could. I don't have any plans for today. Would you like me to come over now? If you can, we would really appreciate it." "Okay, I'll be right over." As he left the house, Kevin was a little worried, wondering what exactly Carrie wanted to tell him. When he entered his former mother-in-law's house, he immediately remembered all his previous visits there. They had all been pleasant, but this one was not going to be one of them. Carrie wasn't home yet when he arrived, and Joseph and Nancy invited him to join them in the kitchen. After pouring 4 cups of coffee, Joseph said, "Nancy and I will leave you two to talk and we'll go to the living room." They took 2 cups and left, and a few seconds later, Carrie entered the kitchen and sat down across from Kevin. Kevin was surprised at how good she looked. Her hair had grown long enough to be styled, and the color looked good. He noticed that she had lost weight since he had last seen her, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She looked nervous and fidgeted with a handkerchief, and he wondered what she was going to say to him. Finally, he decided to break the ice by saying, "You seem to be recovering well, Carrie." "Thank you, Kevin. I'm very glad you came to talk to me on such short notice. I hope it's not a problem, because you could have waited until it was more convenient for you." Her voice was softer than he remembered, and she continued to twist the handkerchief in her hands as she spoke. He wondered if he had cried when he saw her eyes fill with tears. "No problem, Carrie. How's your memory? Have you remembered anything yet?" She shook her head and replied, "I only remember a few things from the last year and a half. I worked at Crosby and Knox, and the administrator was kind enough to show me around the office and tell me a little about what I did there. Some things seemed familiar, and some I was able to figure out after talking to her. I learned that we were good friends when I worked there, but I didn't remember anything about her since I left the job. It was very upsetting. I can imagine how that must have been. Is there anything you would like to talk to me about that you think might help you remember?" Kevin found that talking to her was easier than he had expected. Carrie smiled and said, "I have a few questions. I talked to Susan for a long time and she really helped me understand some things I did." She was still fiddling with her handkerchief and periodically wiping her eyes with it. Kevin took another sip of coffee and said, "Don't be afraid to ask me anything. I'll try to be as honest with you as I can. Before I ask, I want to say how sorry I am for how I treated you. If I hadn't seen the copies of the letters and talked to the others, I would never have believed I could have done such a thing." Now she wiped her eyes more often. Kevin didn't know how to respond. He couldn't bring himself to say it's okay, considering everything he had been through after her betrayal and its aftermath. Carrie broke the silence, continuing, "I only have vague memories of Bradley and nothing about our relationship. All I know about him is secondhand information." She paused for almost a minute before continuing. "I've seen his photos and heard him described by some of the law firm's employees. He wasn't very well liked, and I don't know what else I can find out about him. I even went to his apartment, and if it weren't for my clothes and things there, I would never have believed I lived with him." The tears flowed faster and faster, and she had to wipe her eyes constantly. Kevin continued to sit silently, waiting for Carrie to ask her questions. Again, after a long pause, she continued, "There was one question that none of them could give me a clear answer to. I wanted to know how you found out what I was doing. I know it had something to do with email, but I don't know how." Kevin told her how he had found the first message and how it had led him to the rest. As he spoke, she opened the desk drawer and pulled out a tattered stack of papers, the letters he had given her parents. He explained how his attention had been drawn to the mention of a lingerie set, and then told her what she herself had told him about buying it. He continued with what she had told him about the purse and the earrings. She stared at him in horror as he repeated the lies she had told him. When he finished, they had to wait for her to compose herself and wipe away her tears. When she finally was able to, she said, "I'm sorry for lying. I know you think it's easy for me to say, but I really am sorry." A few minutes later, she asked, "Since we're talking about letters, tell me about the one Bradley and I teased my driver about." "You'd be better off not asking. When you joked that your chauffeur drove you to his place, you meant me. Every time you came to the state capitol, I drove you to the airport and carried your luggage to the check-in counter. I drove you to his place and even carried the bag with the expensive underwear you were going to wear for him. You both thought it was funny." Just thinking about the information he had gleaned from the letters made him angry again, and he continued, "You weren't just joking about it. You also talked about how you had to persuade me to call your hotel room early in the evening." He went on to describe how he always called around 9:45 and how he was able to prove that she wasn't in the room before or after his calls. It was easy for her to see that he was still angry about it. She started crying again, but after a couple of minutes she was able to say, "I'm so sorry, Kevin. I just can't understand how I could have done that." Kevin took a long sip of coffee before continuing. "It's all in the past now, Carrie. I still get upset when I think about some things, but I've had enough time to get over most of it." The conversation shifted away from the letters and onto her health. She explained to Kevin that the seizures were not uncommon and that doctors had tried various medications to control them. Emotionally, she was unable to think about work and had already quit her job at Crosby and Knox. Her parents had consulted a lawyer, and she expected them to file a lawsuit against the insurance company and Bradley's heirs for the injuries she had sustained in the accident. After 15 minutes of small talk, Kevin announced that it was time for him to go. "Before you go, Kevin, I wanted to ask you if you think we could go on a date. I know you probably can't forgive the new Carrie who betrayed you so badly, but I'm the old Carrie again. I don't remember cheating on you or anything like that. Maybe if we go out to dinner or on another date, you'll fall in love with the old Carrie again." She said all this quickly, wanting to get it out before he could say anything to stop her. Kevin thought about what to say and said, "I'm sorry, Carrie. In my memory, there is no old or new Carrie. There is only one Carrie, the one I fell in love with and then lost to Trey. It took me a long time to forget her, but I'm happy with what I've achieved. I know that's not what you want to hear, and I understand that." When he spoke, she began to cry softly again. When he stood up to leave, she asked, "Have you found someone else?" He hesitated again, not knowing how his words would affect her. I think so, Carrie. I think so." "Is it that dark-haired woman with the little girl?" Kevin looked surprised and said, "Yes, it's her. How do you know?" "My parents saw her when they were at the house. They told me about her." Carrie was still wiping her eyes as she said this. Finally, she said, "You deserve someone who will treat you better than I did." With that, she turned and ran out of the room. Kevin left the room and was gone long before Carrie's parents realized that he and Carrie were no longer in the kitchen. A month later, on a sunny April day, Gary and Kevin hired a truck and moved Carol and Chrissy from their apartment to Kevin's house. Things were going so well between them that they decided to find out if they were meant to be together. Chrissy was happy to have a yard to play in and her own big room. Kevin's computer was moved to the corner of the living room, and the room where it had been was freshly painted and decorated for a little girl. In the garage was a large box with a children's play set and a swing that needed to be assembled. All three began attending church regularly every Sunday, and Kevin soon noticed that Carrie's parents didn't go to that church very often. He didn't think much of it when 4 months after Carol moved in with him, the priest announced that they would be getting married the following Saturday and that all parishioners who wanted to attend the wedding were welcome. They decided that a small, informal wedding was just what they wanted and chose the church for the ceremony instead of the city hall. Chrissy was thrilled that she would be her mother's only bridesmaid and that she would soon have a new father. Kevin was quick to tell her that Frank Jansen would always be her father, but he would be happy to become her stepfather. He and Carol agreed that Chrissy would keep her father's last name, even if they formalized the adoption. Kevin insisted that the sacrifice Frank had made should not result in the loss of his only child, and Kevin and Carol spent an hour on the phone with Frank's parents, explaining the upcoming wedding and their plans to keep Chrissy in the Jansen family. The conversation ended with a promise to visit Chrissy's paternal grandparents for a week at the end of the summer. Kevin couldn't wait to meet them, and they decided that the trip would be their honeymoon. Their modest wedding went off without a hitch, and friends and relatives gathered at the church. It was obvious to some that Carol was pregnant, and Chrissy made sure everyone in the church knew she was expecting twin boys. It was hard to tell what excited Chrissy more, the upcoming arrival of two brothers or the fact that Kevin was now her father. A week later, while Kevin was changing the exhaust system on his car before driving to the Johnsons, he ran into his former son-in-law, Robert Kane. He was surprised to learn that Robert and Susan had accompanied Carrie to the wedding the previous week. They had only stayed until the end of the ceremony, as it had been much harder for Carrie than she had expected. Kevin, for his part, couldn't understand how Carrie could have come to his wedding. Why did she want to be there? I know how upset she was when I told her about my relationship with Carol. Seeing us married must have been very upsetting for her. Robert replied, now she's trying to forget you, just like you're trying to forget her. She thought seeing your wedding would help her move on. It bothered her a lot, but she said she was glad she went. The men continued to chat about trivial matters until Robert said, I almost forgot to tell you. Carrie's lawsuit against Bradley Knox's insurance company has been settled. Since she won't be able to work anymore, she managed to get almost $2 million. Part of the settlement was that she would get his apartment, so she's living there now. We couldn't understand why she wanted that, but she said she hoped living there would help her regain her lost memories. Personally, I think that's unlikely. The doctors seem to think she's recovered all she can. I'm afraid that the constant reminders of that bastard won't do her mental state any good. Considering that he's dead, you're remarried, and she only remembers the good times she had with you, I think it's a mistake. 2 years passed uneventfully for Kevin and Carol. Their 2 sons, Frank and Kevin Jr., were joined by a younger sister, Chrissy. They named their daughter Mary Ann after her grandmother. Their house was getting too small for their growing family, and they were already thinking about adding on or buying a bigger house. They hadn't made a final decision yet, deciding they had another year before they had to make a final decision. On a quiet Friday evening, the phone rang and Carol answered it. A minute later, she called Kevin. When he came over, he was surprised to hear that it was Joseph Kane calling. I had to call you, Kevin, so you wouldn't find out about this in the paper tomorrow. Carrie died. Robert found her when he went to see her today. From all appearances, she died yesterday. The news took Kevin by surprise, and he lost his composure for a moment. His reaction was enough for Carol to realize that something was wrong, and she came over and took his hand. Her reassuring touch and concerned look brought him back to the present. He was happy at home with Carol and the children. His brief reaction was a flash of long-forgotten memories of Carrie, which he knew he would never be able to completely erase from his mind. He smiled encouragingly at Carol and then said, I'm so sorry, Joseph. I want to express my sincere condolences to you, Nancy, and Robert. Do you know what happened to her? Joseph hesitated before answering. I'm afraid she took her own life. She left a note for me and my mom, but it's mostly personal stuff meant only for us. She wanted us to tell you that she never stopped loving you. Apparently she tried, but she couldn't get rid of the memories of you. She also wanted you to know that it wasn't just about you. She had ongoing health problems, both physical and mental, and they played a part too. I didn't know she had so many problems. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I came to your house to see her. I'm so sorry this happened. If there's anything I can do to help you or Nancy, please let me know. They exchanged a few more words, and the conversation ended. A few days later, Kevin and Carol went to Carrie's memorial service, where they were able to express their condolences to her family. The only person from Crosby and Knox who attended was her friend Anne, her secretary. Epilogue. A few months later, Kevin learned that he was the beneficiary of $500,000 from Carrie's estate. Most of her fortune went to her parents and brother. Kevin and Carol argued at length about whether to keep the inheritance, as Kevin feared it would be a constant reminder of Carrie. In the end, they kept it and set up 4 trust funds for their children's education. The remainder was used to buy a new, more spacious home. They found that they often thought of Carrie and her generosity, but it didn't cause them any distress. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for new videos.